Hi, I'm Bruce Eckel,
And I'm James Ward.
and this is First Steps in Flex, and we're going to be talking about view states. Now, it seems to me that in a lot of these visual components, they seem to move through like a preset group of states, for lack of a better word. And I mean, they almost look like state machines.
Right.
And so, is there some kind of programming support for this, or do we have to make it up all of ourselves as we go along?
Yeah, we certainly could make it all up ourselves. We could have ActionScript code that can do anything. It can manipulate any properties, do anything it wants at runtime. And that procedural code that we would write in ActionScript can get rather verbose. And so what Flex does is add a declarative syntax to define these different states and define what happens when you move between the states. And so that's what's called view states.
So basically what we do is, for a component, we make a little state machine and define what it looks like and what changes
Exactly.
from as you move from state to
Yep.
state. Okay.
Yep.
Seems simple enough.
Let's give it a try. So we'll call this project view states. So now here in view states, let's remove our layout absolute. Oh, actually in this one we use it. That's great. So this application, if we save this and run it, it has a default state, which is not very exciting, just sits there and does nothing. And we could come into this application and we could add into it a button. So let's give it a button and set the label here to click me. And set some properties on where to position this button. And let me give it an ID as well so we can reference it later on. So we'll call it B. And then set the horizontal center property. So I'm going to align it to 0 in the horizontal center. Set the Y position to 300. And then that's it for my button. So this button has, or this application has a button, and that button is in the given state that we've just defined it. So there it is, 300 down from the top and horizontally centered. And so that's great. Our application is just in the default state and just doing nothing. So let's say we want this button to move up to the top, up to like y equals 50. So that would be essentially a different state, and we could define that declaratively in this application. So the way that we do that, the way we define our states, is we say mx:states, and here we're doing this on the application tag. We can do this on any component, and then we're going to create a new state, and we'll give it a name. We'll call this one button top, and then inside of this state, we're going to tell it to manipulate something on the button. So the way that we manipulate a property is we call this set property. So we're going to say set property. We're going to tell it what object we want to set the property on. So we're going to use data binding and say on our button B, we're going to specify the name of the property we want to set, in this case Y. And then we're going to set the value. What do we want the value to be in this state? And we'll make it 50. So that's how we create a new state. So that's a new state in our application where the Y property, which in the default state starts at 300, is going to then, in the button top state, become 50.
But now, if you do this, don't you need another state so you return back to your original one?
We can, yeah, absolutely. And so let's do that. So let's actually now, in our button, what we're going to do is add a click event. So that when the user clicks this button, we're going to toggle the states. So what I'm going to say is if my current state, actually before we do that, let's just set the state. So what I'm going to say is current state. So there's a property on component, it's called current state, and we can set that to a new property which just matches the name of the state that we want to switch to. So button top is the name that we want to set the current state to. So let's save that, and let's reload and run this. So there we go. We just switched. Yep, when we clicked it, we switched to the button top state, which just set the Y property. When we click it again, it does nothing because it's already in that state.
Setting itself back to that new state.
Exactly.
So how do we go back?
So let's toggle it. So to do that, let's say if our current state is button top, then what we're going to do is set the current state equal to just an empty string. So that is the default state, is just an empty string.
So we actually, that means just by doing nothing, we already have a state, and we can return to it by giving it the empty string.
Exactly. And then if we're not in the button's top state, then switch to it. Okay, so now let's go back here and switch to, now we're in button top, and now we're back in the default state.
Oh, that's kind of fun.
Yeah. So that's just changing the view states on our application. Because we define the state on our application, we can modify the children of the application. We can also specify view states on custom components.
So what other kinds of things can we change with states?
Yeah, that's a good question. So here all we're doing is setting a property and then setting it back when we switch back to the default state. There are other things that we can do with states. We can add children and remove children from the container. So application is a container. It has children. In this case, it just has a single button. But let's say we want to add something to this application in a new state. So let's go in and create, let's change this out. So what we're going to do is we're going to modify our button. We'll give this thing a label. We'll say detail state. So what we want to add is a text area when the user clicks this button. Oh, I'm sorry. The label is view details. There we go. And then let's modify this a little bit more. We're not going to use layout absolute anymore. We're going to switch back to the default vertical layout and remove all of this. So now let's add a click handler to our button. And what we're going to do on click is change the state. We'll do that in a second after we define our state. So let's go ahead and actually define our state now. So we're going to just come in here and change this to detail state. So this is our new detail state. And rather than setting a property, what we're going to do is call this add child. So add child, what it will do, when we switch into the state, it will add a text area, in this case, with these are the details. So it's just going to add this text area to the application. We can specify more properties on where to add it, but application is a container. When we don't specify the layout, it's going to use the vertical layout. So in this case, that text area will appear underneath the button. So the last thing we need to do is when we click this button, let's call current state equals detail state. So we're just going to switch to that detail state and show the details. So let's go back here, view details, and there we go. Now we get our text area. And similar to what we did before, we could toggle states. We could have a close button that would close the state, and all that would do is just set the current state back to the default state, and that would remove the child. There's also in a state you can remove a child. So let's say that in the state, in addition to adding a child, we wanted to remove the button. We could do that as well. So inside of our state, we can add a remove child, and then we would just reference the button and tell it to remove that button. So all sorts of different things we can do, adding and removing children inside of our view state. So there's some other things that we can do in view states as well. We can set styles and let's see. If we go into the state help, we can actually see a number of different things that we can do. Add child, remove child, set event handler, set property, which we showed, set style, and then we can do transitions, which we'll talk about in the effects chapter. So states are just an easy way to declaratively define these transition or the different states of our application or of a specific component.